Welcome to Thanks for Visiting, a podcast that's part conversation, part time capsule. I'm your podcast host, Lex. In these minutes and moments, I'm sitting down with people I deeply respect and admire to explore life, the human experience, and the creative spirit. Together, we're creating our visitor records, snapshots of our existence and contributions while we're visiting here on planet Earth. Let's help each other navigate this wild human adventure called life. Today we're exploring 5 key aspects of emotional maturity and discussing why it can be so hard to grow emotionally as an adult. I'm back with Kati Lightholder, our guest from the very first episode of Thanks for Visiting. But Kati, did you know you're getting promoted from guest to co-host?
I am honored, and talking to you is the easiest thing in the world, and I love it.
It is some of the most exciting stuff for me to do. Do you want to reintroduce yourself?
I would love to. My name is Kati Lightholder, and I'm an independent filmmaker, a painter, and an organizer. And I love talking about all the topics that Lex has planned for this podcast. So I'm excited about today's topic. Would you be okay if I listed the categories?
Yeah, go ahead. List off these categories. 5 key aspects of emotional maturity.
Number 1, self-awareness. Number 2, resilience / our capacity. Number 3, personal responsibility. Number 4, self-regulation and coping mechanisms. And number 5 is empathy / our perspective, and just all perspectives. So those are the categories. But maybe I could start by asking you a question. Is that okay?
Oh, sure.
Do you feel you were an emotionally mature child or adolescent / how do you feel like you are now?
Oof, that's a great question. So as a young person, I didn't have outbursts. I really didn't. You could ask my mom, you could ask my dad. My mom's like, you were an easy kid. I didn't have these wild teenage years. Did that mean I had a lot of good coping skills? I used music. As my coping skill. That and my faith were the 2 things that kept my feet on the ground. And I did struggle with depression. My music and my belief in something higher that said my life was worth living helped me deal with depression that told me maybe things would be better if you weren't around. So I had a lot of stuff going on internally that informed my emotional maturity or capacity. It made me extremely empathetic, which we'll get into. I guess dealing with my own inner anxiety, depression, and negative inner dialogue that kind of told me I was maybe a burden or this, that, the other, or I was in the way as the youngest, or like there wasn't room, or there's enough going on, just like shrink. But then how does that come up as I am an adult trying to heal the inner child? So as an adult, I've had a harder time.
I feel like I just had an aha about my childhood listening to, and I need to write this down.
Please share whatever. It's the conversation with you that creates these aha moments for me. And even just talking about it out loud, I'm like, oh.
Wait a minute. So I'll just point out something you said that stuck out to me. You were a child of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So was I. So there's obviously some cultural things that happened with children of the 80s that maybe don't happen with the children of today, certainly.
Great point.
You know, the idea of Children are meant to be seen and not heard. Now, my parents were not at all strict like that. I've seen those parents represented in movies. That's not my parents.
Same.
But there's still, I think there was something in me as a child who was observing, who just knew my place. And as an adult, holy moly, people in general not knowing their place irritates me. Now, let me clarify before somebody gets upset about that. What I mean is, you're an intern at a corporation. You don't speak up if the VP is saying something and disagree with them in a big meeting. That's knowing your place. That's what I mean by that.
I think in WWF, there's a wrestler that's like, know your role. And I think of that. Know your role.
Anyway, so I just now when you were talking correlated my frustration over people knowing their role to my childhood and knowing my role or knowing my place. That was an aha. I'm just going to keep track and one down. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So to recap, why don't you give us a recap of that? Were you an emotionally mature young person, and are you one today?
I do feel I was an emotionally mature young person. I often get told that I'm an old soul. Kind of was. I was like very good at self-soothing. I had someone recently be like, wow, you're really good at entertaining yourself. And I was like, yeah, I kind of had to. I was the only girl in my family besides my mom. And I was the youngest. There was a 3 and 5 year age gap. So it's like when you're young, your older siblings don't want to hang out with you. So I learned quickly how to self-soothe through music often, music and art. One of my favorite memories, sorry, there's a little tangent, but one of my favorite memories my mom tells me is that when I was 4, she walked in on me in my bedroom and I was painting and listening to classical music. I think that just gives a picture of the kind of young person I was. And emotionally speaking, I think, yeah, I was a pretty well-regulated kid at that point. But as I've grown, I think I'm still pretty decent at emotional regulation. But you get into certain relationships and you start seeing dynamics from your partner's upbringing, your own cultural differences, generational differences, different ways that you and your partner or you and your friends or you and your coworkers were brought up. These are the things I feel like cause the rubs and the friction, and I'm needing to learn that now. The relationships you have as a kid, they're not the same depth as they are as an adult. You're not having the same dialogues. But how about you?
So when I think about myself as a child, I feel like I was completely a mess in this area. I was not a troublemaker. I was a good kid, but I really lacked resilience. If a friend made me mad, well, they were no longer my friend. Like, I wrote them off. And I think about, why was that? That's terrible. And I'm sure my parents tried to help me through that, but apparently the tools they had didn't get through to my brain. And so I would just drop friends. And that definitely stuck with me into some parts of adulthood where if I didn't like a job, I would quit. I'm not one to stick with something if I hate it. Now, sometimes that's good. And sometimes it would have behooved me to stick with something a little longer, overcome that barrier, grow from it, and maybe then move on. So I think now, as my current adult self, I'm taking so much extra care to move as far beyond where I was as a kid as possible, and to try to gather all the tools, learn all the things, to become just like the most evolved version of myself that I can be. I mean, that's half of what you and I strive for every day. But I think a lot of it's because I was so bad at it as a kid. What's interesting when you dive into this topic and you become self-aware of this, you start noticing in other people things that would be really easy to judge. So you have to really keep that in check. I have to keep that in check.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
I think when you start the journey towards growth and self-awareness, as you're growing, it just feels like more things keep popping up. You're like, am I a mess? Because you're actually finally looking in a mirror with the goal of growing and changing these things that you didn't like.
I couldn't agree more. The moment I think I'm self-aware, I learn something and I go, oh, I'm not at all self-aware. I know myself 0%. I clearly no idea how I'm coming across to others, and I'm a terrible person.
Yep. I say the older I get, the less I claim to know. And I actually think that's okay. The closest people in my life now are these people like you that say, I'm trying to become the best version of myself, and are people who don't claim to have it all figured out and aren't dug in and aren't operating in the black and white thinking. That's a large part of the podcast, right? Is like, let's just discuss. Let's have a conversation, a dialogue.
I have 1,000 things to say about that. It's one, and I've met people like this who they are just convinced of X, Y, or Z, and there's no wiggle room, there's no gray area, and I just go, okay, that's where they're at. One of my biggest pet peeves, people that are know-it-alls. I know enough to know that it's not always black and white.
Yeah. When I was taking a graduate class on human development, I learned about a developmental theory that actually supports this idea. It's a post-formal thought developmental theory by William Perry that focuses on the spectrum of dualism to relativism, which is commonly observed during one's college or advanced education years. And Perry lays out 9 positions, the first position being strict dualism thinking, aka black and white thinking, in which one believes there's only one absolute right answer. And then it ranges to the positions 7, 8, and 9, in which there's commitment and resolve, which he defines as a state of courageous resolve in which the individual continues the work of self-reflection and openness to learning, even if it challenges one's current framework or thought. And so when I read that, I was like, whoa, there's actually a theory that supports this idea that you're actually further developed in your thinking when you move away from black and white thinking, when you acknowledge that there is gray area. Took me a while to get there, but...
No, my mind is blown. I love that. It makes a lot of sense. The more you know, the less you realize you know.
Yes, if you want to jump into one of the sections, because I think like empathy, perspective taking, accountability and responsibility, and self-awareness, regulation, these all deal with the ability to take responsibility for ourselves, but also like have compassion towards another person's experience. And the conversation with development, that requires openness, willing to explore other ideas or other people's perspectives, right?
We're deep into it already, I think. We've no doubt proved that self-awareness is a big part of an emotional maturity. Why don't we jump to the next one, which I think is super interesting? It's resilience, and then our capacity or our willingness to change. And I'm curious to know your history with the word resilience. Have you always known about it? Are you good at it? What is your experience with that topic?
If you had asked me this question 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have considered myself a resilient person because I felt like I struggled with depression at a younger age, struggled with anxiety. I'm quite hard on myself. I feel like I'm hardest on myself than I am on other people. I can forgive other people very easily, but I'm just a bit tough on myself. I hold myself to quite unrealistic standards. So because of anxiety, I would not have thought I was a resilient person just because I dealt with anxiety and worry and future thinking. That alone would make me be like, nope, not a resilient person. But my dad actually, on a phone call, maybe like a year and a half ago, he was like, Lexi, you're the most resilient person I know. And that made me want to cry. Sometimes you need to have another person see something in you for you to see it yourself. And my dad, I deeply respect. My dad's a good man, so for him to see something in me, that healed so much in me. It helped me kind of look back and see what I have come through.
Thank you for sharing. That's very, very cool to have that from your dad.
The piece that I'll add to that is I was talking to another friend's dad who does career assessments. And I remember saying, like, man, I'm just having a hard time with something in my life. And he said, do you remember when years ago when we talked, you said you wanted to be a woman of character? And I said, yeah, I do remember that. I want to be a woman of character. And he said, there's a scripture that talks about we rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, which produces character, which produces hope. Sometimes we can be so focused on the struggle that we are failing to see how we're growing through it. Just want to throw out this idea that people have an easy life. Life is not easy. That's, again, the point of these conversations. We exist in a broken world with all these dynamics. We all have struggles, but it's how you get through that, right? I think there's this idea of conflict and struggle really does end up showing you who you are, how you handle that. And so I'd like to throw it back to you, your question, because I know you to be a resilient person. Curious your thoughts on resiliency.
You bring up such a good reminder. All the junk you might be going through is going to help you be better. It sucks while you're going through it. I'm exhausted from it currently. I don't even have words anymore. And I lost the words for this over a year ago. It makes you question, okay, so this is what life is? Okay, so I need to get comfortable with things being often very sad and very frustrating. And resilience as a concept is newer to me. I was not aware until it was brought up at my day job as a characteristic they wanted in a worker. And I was like, oh, okay. It's certainly not something I knew as a young person. I think I'm very behind on that. I'm behind. Jumping on it now, though. Trying.
I don't think you're behind in your resilience. Maybe the concept of it is new, but being your friend and knowing you, you are very resilient. You don't give up, which for me, when you say the word resilience, a big one for me is two things. It builds confidence going through adversity, and when you get through it, it builds that confidence that I am capable. Have you ever had this moment? I kind of want to pause and have people think, what was a time in your life where you thought you would never get through it? You might even be in that moment now. But I'm sure there's a time when we can all look back and be like, I remember this time that was so horrible, difficult, sad, heartbreaking, grief, whatever it was, and I didn't think I'd make it through. And then being where we are now today and looking back, I think we have to pause and look back at these younger versions of ourselves and be like, I did it. I did it. I remember I really didn't think I'd ever be able to get past something or get through this time, but I did. And I did it with integrity, especially when we talk about our values. I did it. I got through that without hurting someone more, especially if you can look back at going through something and not getting through it because you climbed over people or hurt someone in the process or lied or cheated or stole your way through it. That builds confidence. When life is hard now, I try to look back and be like, you did it before, you can do it again. And I actually have a mantra now. When I feel flooded by life or overwhelmed, I go, whatever happens, I will be okay. Whatever happens, I will be okay. I know we'll get into self-regulation, but that is one for me of whatever happens, I will be okay. Or my therapist even reminded me, if I am in a safe environment, to say, I am safe. I am safe. And if I'm not, or if I'm not sure if I'm in a safe environment, telling yourself, I am worth protecting. And if this escalates, I will bring myself out of this and into a safe environment.
That relates so closely to personal responsibility. And that I'm going to set aside for one moment so I can rewind backwards to something else you said when you were talking about the confidence that you gain from getting through something. You gain confidence, but the growing pains that you went through can be so painful, they can actually be physically painful. But then you come out of the other side with confidence, yes, but also just like a further refined, I don't know, soul. I don't know what the word is. You're just a further refined self.
Sense of self, I think.
Sense of self. Love that. That's exactly the essence I wanted to get to. It's the refining, the coming out of the refining, and why is it so hard? I'm hoping we'll figure something out together here, because I don't know the answer. I want to be able to do the hard thing more often. So I figure if we dissect enough, we'll figure something out. That so directly relates to the idea of personal responsibility as it relates to emotional maturity. So if we're not willing to take responsibility for, let's just say, hurting somebody's feelings, we're never going to move beyond that. You're stuck. Maybe you have some people in your life like that, and you just see them and you go, I want you to move beyond that, but I can't do it for you. Sometimes seeing people like that can help you go, I don't want to be that way. And so it spurs you on to rise above it, even though it's painful. I did some chat GPTing to try to figure out, like, am I just a weirdo, or is it actually physically painful to go through some of these? When I said, can growing emotionally sometimes cause physical pain? And it said, yeah, like muscle tension and body aches, headaches and migraines, digestive issues, fatigue. That wasn't really what I was trying to get at, because I'm not talking about any of those. It was a little less definitive than that. So I said, what about less definitive but mental pain? Like, why is it hard to move beyond how we normally respond to a situation? Because I think it can boil down to that a lot of the time. So then it brings up answers talking about neural pathways and habit loops. It talks about emotional safety and predictability. Ding, ding, ding. Emotional weight of the past. Talk about a big package to unpack there. And then resistance to discomfort. That is me in a nutshell. If I had to be defined by something like this, I resist discomfort. I never want to be uncomfortable. I dislike it greatly. And that is absolutely going to stunt my emotional growth if I don't try to move beyond that. And I recently was able to take a tiny step in that direction. And I felt that inner pain, but I got past it, and now I feel amazing. I'll give the example. There was a situation where I had created some art, and I was prepared to see that art in a certain place. And then when I got there, it wasn't there. And it was upsetting that I wasn't told that it wouldn't be there. It was upsetting that it was on a holiday, and I felt like it was ruining my holiday. Mm-hmm. Personally, my feelings were hurt. Then I talk about that with Blake, and he immediately takes offenses for me, which not a great thing to do. But I love that he did. He was sticking up for me. He felt it was unjust what had happened. He was angry for me. The fact that he was angry for me made me take pause for a second and go, all right, you've got a decision to make, because he's going to easily do whatever you want in this situation. And then I just sat back for a minute and let myself dream a bit, because I know some people that they would take this situation and they would be stubborn about it. And they would go, you know what? I'm offended and that can never be fixed. So now I'm going to make the person that made me feel this way, I'm going to disassociate from them. Like younger Katie, they're no longer my friend. I write them off. I'm not going to tell them this. So that would be one path that I could take. And then generations upon generations would know, oh, great grandma Katie had her feelings hurt. So that's why we dislike XYZ. And I said, whoa, that feels terrible. I dislike that. I'm above that at this point in my life. I've got to take a different path. So if I turn the opposite direction, I go, all right, we're going to breathe through this. We're going to acknowledge that this hurts like crazy. We're going to acknowledge that we're a sensitive little soul and our feelings are so hurt, and it's actually making us question stuff that's way beyond this person could have ever known. I'm questioning if I'm good at this. I'm questioning my self-worth. Like, I took it far. I'm sensitive. It's not abnormal, I think, for some people to take things so far. So all that to say, I sat with it and I told Blake, I was like, listen up. We're not going to start talking about this situation. Let's let things pan out. This is hurtful. It's not cool. We're just going to sit with it. I sat with it for a few weeks, which is too long. Shouldn't have sat with it for that long. But that one morning I was like, this is it. I am texting the person that was in charge of this situation, and I'm just going to inquire some questions. And, I did. I was like, hey, what's going on with this? Did you go a different direction? And they said, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you. I didn't keep you up to date on what's going on. But we swapped it out for the next 2 months while we adjust something else so that it fits better. And I almost fell off of my chair because I was like, we were considering disassociating over a misunderstanding.
And assumption, right?
Yes, assumption.
We are so quick to assume. I think that is a very human quality. And thank you for your candidness on it. And how cool that you had the ability to question your thinking. That's a big thing with Stoicism. Like, am I questioning my thoughts? Like, just because it's a thought doesn't mean it's true. And you questioned it, or questioned your behavior around it. And you went to the source. I love that you went to the source. I love that Blake wanted to protect and look out for you. And then you also wanted to protect back and not bring him into it. Like, that is love. First off, like, how beautiful. But then you went to the source. And that is so hard. I just want to take a minute, like, applaud you, because that is so hard. Triangulation is another thing that is an extremely unhealthy dynamic, to bring other people into a dynamic that you're having with another person. And you rose beyond a vast number of other ways you could have handled it. That is you practicing emotional maturity and vulnerable. I'm sure it didn't, like, how did that feel? Did you feel vulnerable going into that?
Well, funny enough, in the first episode, I told a little story about how I stood at my bedroom window and I let my arms go down at my sides and I felt my feelings. It was that morning that I texted this person, and I felt shaky as heck. I just think back to, if I was a younger version of myself, I might have told a bunch of friends about this situation, turned them against the issue, caused all kinds of drama that was absolutely unnecessary because it was a misunderstanding. I'm thankful that it worked out the way that it did, because it would have been just so easy for it to not. It shows the power of hurt feelings.
You said something that made me think of what wires together.
Ooh, say more.
The more we have a consistent reaction or thought or behavior to something, and those neurosynapses are firing, the more we do that, the more they wire together and become, it's like a cycle. That wire then informs how we're going to react to something similar again.
Well, right along those same lines, so when I looked up, why is it so hard? Why is it painful to move beyond how you normally respond? One of the things it says is your brain is designed to create neural shortcuts to make decisions and reactions more automatic. The more you respond to a situation a certain way, examples, anxiety and conflict, shutting down under criticism, the stronger that neural pathway becomes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting to think about those in shortcuts, because not only are you making it more likely that you'll have that reaction again, but you're going to have it faster.
It makes me think of predictive text, right? It's like, I'm going to predict you're going to say this because this is typically how you respond. We've got to watch for the shortcuts, the predictive text. You'll hear a lot of older people or older generations say, like, this is the way it's been done. And maybe we should challenge that sometimes.
I just have to read this other bullet point because it goes along with that. It says, changing your response requires building a new pathway, which takes effort and repetition. And at first it feels unnatural, like writing with your non-dominant hand, which is why older folks that might be stuck in their ways, they literally are stuck more so in their ways than somebody who's younger.
Mm-hmm. You were mentioning a change that was uncomfortable to make. And from things I've read, change creates a stress reaction in our physiological body. So we are predisposed to prefer not changing. So when we do decide to change, it's uncomfortable and it's actually producing stress in our body. And that's where that resilience comes in. I heard someone say it was this guy who had a gambling problem and he had a video game addiction. The topic was on discipline. And he was saying, if you are waiting for you to be motivated, good luck. Because humans, the way we are wired for comfort, if you're waiting to be motivated, you are now being driven more by your desires. You have to challenge that.
That's awesome. That applies to like a billion things in my life right now. Where you're heading is interesting.
He was like a video game addict, gambler. He realized, I'm driven by my wants. And he didn't like how that made him so impressionable by his wants. And that hit me too. I was like, I don't want to be just purely driven by what I want, because sometimes I want to just sit on the couch and not do anything. Sometimes what we want isn't what's best. And I think of this with creative artistry as well. If you're just waiting for inspiration, if you read enough stuff about cultivating a creative practice, they say discipline. Sit down and do it. Just be disciplined. Rise above your wants. Rise above what you want at that moment and commit to yourself. I don't like the idea of like rise and grind culture, like just grind it out, because a lot of people need rest. So I don't like the idea of rise and grind culture, but I do like the idea of committing to myself. I am worth committing to. My goals are worth committing to. So sometimes I'm not going to feel like sitting down and working on a new song. I'm not going to feel like working out, but I'm worth it. My health is worth it. So rising above the initial want and doing what the next best thing is based on what I do want to accomplish in my life. Again, going back to like we're wired for comfort.
Yeah. Another thing that my research here is telling me that emotional safety and predictability is something that we lean toward, right? So even if a reaction isn't serving us well, it's still familiar. And the brain prefers predictability over uncertainty. And then also growth requires stepping into the unknown, which can trigger a fear response, even if it's a positive change. One of the notes I wrote down under personal responsibility was our past experiences, how we were raised, what we witnessed, and therefore imitated. You know, did we see examples that are healthy of people taking responsibility, or did we see more of people taking on the victim mentality? One topic we didn't get to hit on back when we were talking about resilience is our capacity. We may not have the capacity to do any of this. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, we're pretty high up on that pyramid in this entire podcast. So if you're not familiar with the hierarchy of needs, on the bottom of the pyramid, there's a strip for physiological needs. So that's your food, your water, warmth, rest. So if you have all those things, then you can rise up to the next part of the pyramid, which is safety needs. Are you safe? Do you have security? Above that, there's a strip for belongingness and love needs, friends, intimate relationships. Above that are esteem needs like prestige, feelings of accomplishment. And then the very top of the pyramid is self-actualization. achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. And that's right, we sit nicely in that top little pyramid, and aren't we privileged to be able to do that?
Yeah. I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Also because we ebb and flow, right? We have different seasons in life. And it's really nice to come back to that pyramid and think of what needs need to be taken care of. When you were talking about personal responsibility and our past experiences and how they influence dynamics now, what are questions we can be asking ourselves in these moments? Like, why does this feel uncomfortable? Or even when you're saying some people have a hard time apologizing, why does it feel hard to apologize? Is it because I actually didn't know I wasn't apologizing? I think there's some people who are like, I thought I did apologize. Some people, an apology to them means that they're wrong or that it's all their fault because something in their story earlier told them that if they apologized, they were weak, they were bad, they were wrong. It's these identity labels, attacks on their own identity. A lot of this is about asking ourselves these deeper questions, pausing. Maybe we get into self-regulation because I wrote down some stuff on how to regulate emotions, self-regulation, controlling emotional impulses and responding appropriately to situations. I'm currently working through this daily Stoic journal. The first weeks in this year are around controlling what you can control, which a lot of it is your emotions. The Stoics ask, what can you control? Stop trying to control everyone else except the fact that we can't control everything. What can you control? You can control your reactions. So when I was writing in this journal, a lot of it was push pause, stop, wait, take a beat, respond versus react, to truly listen to what the other person said. When I think of self-regulation, I think of pause.
One of the things that I was thinking about as we were ending the personal responsibility one, and how were we raised and what did we witness and are we able to say I'm sorry, goes right along with self-regulation. It's a coping mechanisms. I think that, not being able to apologize is a coping mechanism.
Yes.
What coping mechanisms have you developed to survive? Because ultimately we're all just trying to survive. Do you know of any of yours?
Oh, I think this is massive because I had written down the question, what makes this so hard? I'm going to come back to your question, but what makes emotional maturity, emotional growth, what makes it so hard? And I put, when we feel that something of ours is being threatened, our job, our safety, our finances, our reputation, fill in the blank.
When you mentioned reputation, my hand went up in the air. Man, I wish I didn't care. I wish that part of me away. I wish I didn't have pride. I wish I didn't care so deeply about being respected. Ugh, but I do.
Me too. I think that's very human. I remember my mom saying that she had to get to a point in her life where she was okay with being misunderstood. And I'm like, oh, I so deeply have the desire to be understood. I so don't like the feeling of being misunderstood. I want people to feel better. So if I ever say something that someone misinterprets, where they think I've actually said something out of line or out of turn, I don't like being misunderstood. A coping skill I probably developed out of the need to be understood is probably over communicating, over talking things through way too much. I think I can withdraw, I can isolate, especially when I start to feel maybe misunderstood or when I just feel really tired and fatigued, I can withdraw. And I think there's a difference. I'll say it's healthy when it's solitude. It's unhealthy when it's isolation. When it's coming from a healthy place of, I want to do this because I enjoy doing this, that's solitude. When it's coming from, I need to protect, I need to withdraw, maybe there is an argument or miscommunication or conflict and that feels uncomfortable. Trying not to isolate and trying to repair. And then like creativity, like creating something, organizing. I like to organize. So
Ding, ding, ding.
do you want to speak to some of yours?
There was literally just somebody on social who was like, I can't get enough of like getting my stuff in order. And I wanted to respond and say, you're trying to find control in this world that's out of control.
Yeah, it's real. I'm down with coping skills that don't like harm other people, including yourself. What, you gonna organize yourself to a negative place? I don't know.
This idea is not new by any means. The job that I had where I met Lex, I was sharing an office space with another coworker who I love, and I would be cleaning. I would take everything off of my desk and I would dust it all and I would clean it. I would take things apart. And she was like, you trying to get a sense of control over there? And I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I didn't know it, but that's what I'm doing. And she was absolutely right. Yeah, I just felt like things were just, I was thinking through stuff, I had a lot on my plate. I was like a young professional at that time trying to navigate this like crazy organization. And I would just be like, I've got to control something.
I have to say I respect that though, versus the alternative is trying to control other people. Before we sat down to have this conversation, knowing what we were talking about, I was thinking about power and control. Emotional maturity, those who are emotionally mature, I would say they have self-regulation, self-control. You are able to control yourself, what you say, your behaviors. I have a very hard time with people who want power and control over other people. When I worked as an advocate for survivors, also when I worked at a group home for foster youth, I noticed this theme, this power and control theme that exists within the oppressor, the exploiter, the person who is exploitive, abusive, oppressive. It was based on this power and control. That's why I have a hard time when I see people not willing to take responsibility. I get it. This human existence is tricky. There's so much we can't control. And out of that helplessness, how are you going to choose to respond? Little tangent, but I have this theory that if something happens in our life where we feel like we are out of control, some people take this path of, I never want to make other people feel the way I just felt. And they go the path of empathy and kindness and care and compassion. And some people take the route of, I never want to be made to feel like this again. I'm never going to let anyone else hurt me or control me. I will always be in control. I will always have the upper hand. I will always have power. And I think that's where you can see a beautiful little kid kind of split off and develop into a person that is controlling, demanding, maybe has a personality disorder. That's also a protective personality that they developed over time because they were hurt at one point and they decided no one's ever going to hurt me again. I'm going to control things from now on. That breaks my heart. It's why we have a lot of issues these days. If I can encourage people, these questions of like, how can I control myself? It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. And it can feel so uncomfortable. But I'm proud of anyone out there that's doing the hard work and looking at themselves.
You're like the human version of ChatGPT, because over here on my screen I'm reading, it says, how to move beyond this? Self-compassion, acknowledge that growth is hard, and be patient with yourself.
It is, yeah.
It also says pause and observe your breath example.
Pause. Little side note with the pause thing. My mom said when I was going into an interview, if they ask you something and you're not sure how to respond, it's okay to pause and say, let me think about that for a moment. Again, grace. Give ourselves grace. Give others grace. Let me think about that. Because if we're talking about emotional regulation, If I was in a disagreement with someone and they said, let me think about that, what you just said, I'd actually feel very respected.
Yes.
They actually care enough to think about it.
I think I would like that more than anything. Which, wow, that leads directly to the last aspect of emotional maturity, at least on my list, empathy, which I think combines with perspective, having the ability to see others' perspectives specifically.
If anyone needs a little lesson on empathy, Brene Brown is a sociologist, and she describes sympathy for someone as showing them pity. Oh, I feel bad for you. That doesn't really feel good, but empathy is actually trying to sit with them in the emotion, imagine what they're feeling, imagining what they're going through. And you don't have to say things like, I know what you're going through. Don't actually say that if you don't know what they're going through. And even if you've gone through something similar, I have to practice this, just pausing and letting them express their feelings, acknowledging it, validating it. That sucks. And I don't have to have the answers or the right words, but just sitting with them in the mess.
I think that a world of issues could be overcome with a drop of empathy. I don't know. I feel like one of my soapboxes has to do with learning enough to get the perspective of another person. You know, if we're all the equivalent of uniqueness to snowflakes, meaning we're all 100% of people are different from each other, that's that many different perspectives that we can have the opportunity to experience. Oh, it changes everything. Like, think about, you know, if you have never known a parent of a child with a disability, then you become the parent of a child with a disability. Your perspective on that topic is 100% shifted. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It makes me think of the story of there's a guy on a subway. His kids are like running about and being a little chaotic, this, that, the other. And someone says something to him like, hey, can you kind of get your kids under control? And he says, yeah, I'm sorry, their mom just died.
Yes, I've heard the same thing.
This idea that we never know what another person's going through.
There's a great little graphic about that where you see, I don't know, is it an iceberg? And this is like what you know of the situation. Then below the water is this enormous part of the iceberg. And it's like what's really going on in their life. Amen. Amen to that. We don't know. We think we know, but we don't know.
And it's easy. It is a very human thing to just keep moving through life so quickly, focused on our own tasks at hand. I try to remember like being out in the wild with other people, being like, there's people in this room who might have found out a negative diagnosis or just lost a loved one. I know when I was going through moments of grief, I remember going through a checkout line at the supermarket thinking the person standing at the checkout has so much power right now. If they say the wrong thing, it could feel like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I have to remember that I have that power just in a dynamic in the grocery store or on the road.
Yes, yes, yes. You have that power. With every person you pass, my dad is big on always saying, like, when you see somebody, just smile. You could change their entire day. And it sounds simple, but it's kind of a huge idea. He's big on books like The Power of Positive Thinking. I love that about him. And he's passed that love of that type of stuff on to me, obviously. I don't think I've ever walked by somebody in the past 10 years and I haven't at least tried to crack a little bit of a smile. You know, you have that power too. I love that you said that.
We all have that power, right? It's just, I think that's another aspect of this emotional maturity. I want to be in a strong emotional place because of what we're talking about, because of how these subtle little interactions with strangers, our loved ones and with strangers, they really can have a ripple effect. And if we can ingest a bit more compassion into the world, that'd be great. We're all going through our own journey. Some days we feel stronger than others. And maybe even just realizing that when someone else is having a less emotionally mature moment, for us to not match that, rise above it, be better, do better. And that could be a compassionate thing for the other person, right? I know I want grace when I mess up. I'd like someone to extend grace to me. And how can I do that too? It's hard. It's really hard when our stuff combines, or when our like baggage or histories, when they collide. It's hard.
It really is. And it makes me think about maybe there's somebody listening who's immature like I am and wants to be more mature, but it just hurts too bad. Well, I wonder if this would be helpful. Think about that person that you know who's also very emotionally immature and how they would respond to something, and make sure you never, ever respond the way that they would. I feel like I've in no way reached a good level of maturity if I still have to think that way. But it really worked for me this last time, and I'm baby stepping in the right direction.
I think that's quite smart. Again, the Stoics say the best revenge is to not be like your enemy, to not react the way that you don't like someone reacting to you.
I love that. Well, so I'm going to attempt to do the impossible, which is recap the 5. So we were talking about emotional maturity and why it is so hard to grow in emotional maturity as an adult. We talked about self-awareness being a big part of it. We talked about emotional intelligence. We talked about resilience and if we even have the capacity for emotional growth in a given season. We talked about personal responsibility and how we were raised and what we witnessed and what we caught, not what we were taught. We talked about self-regulation and maybe some coping mechanisms to survive this life. And then we talked about empathy and how there are as many perspectives in the world as there are people. So all those things combined together can help us grow, but gosh, it's not easy.
Are there tools that you'd like to share with people that might be good tools for them?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I do have one, and it's the website 16personalities.com. So it's the number 6, personalities.com. It's a free personality assessment. And I think the more you learn about yourself, the more you can grow in your emotional maturity because so this personality assessment, and again, there are dangers to these assessments, of course, so you want to take it with open eyes and take from it what resonates with you and leave behind what doesn't. But there's plenty of things in these assessments that amaze me, that help me learn about myself. And then I can keep my eye on those things for myself. Like maybe I don't have a strength in a certain area, but just acknowledging it and knowing about it, I can more easily work on it. So I think that is a great place for people to start.
I love that.
How about you?
Books. I like books. The lessons of the Stoics have been helpful, again, because it's very much about controlling what you can control and not other people.
The Stoics have endless things that seem to apply to us.
Yeah, they're solid. I think also adding good things. Anything good that we can add into the world to combat all the hard stuff. So maybe people thinking about what makes them happy, as long as it doesn't harm someone else. But things that really fill up your cup. You're talking about coping skills, and I did want to ask if you have particular coping skills you recommend, because I think focusing on healthy coping skills. Do you want to speak to any of your coping skills?
I have endless. I feel like I have endless coping skills because I have this sample platter of mental health stuff that I will say I've been blessed with. I will call them a blessing, though they are very hard sometimes. I have OCD, which manifests itself in intrusive thoughts, which is just like absolutely no fun at all. So when that happens to me, sometimes I'll use the coping mechanism where I look for 5 different things and I touch them. This feels scratchy, this feels soft, this is fabric, this is my hair. type of thing. It's like it's a really just tangible.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I wrote down the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique for people who this might help them. In cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the techniques that they recommend for grounding is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. List 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. If that's too much, just remember your 5 senses.
Yeah, I literally just take the shortcutted version of that.
I just think with coping skills, anything you can add to fill up your cup or to fill up your relationships, investing positive things in your own life, that actually makes me think of one more thing, / 10 more things. No, this idea that we change when the current situation is more painful.
Oh, say more.
Than for us to not change. Tony Robbins in that Awaken the Giant Within book, he says, get leverage. Associate massive pain to not changing and massive pleasure to changing right now. And asking yourself, what will this cost me if I don't change? What's it already costing me mentally, physically, spiritually, etc. right now? If I do change, how will that make me feel about myself? How much happier will I be? So on the topic of emotional maturity, if you want to change the way you're showing up, what will it cost you if you don't? What's it already costing me mentally, physically, spiritually? If you're someone that gets defensive in an argument or someone who doesn't apologize, what is that costing? It's costing more time because I'm sure the disagreement just keeps going on, or it's costing loss of trust in your relationship. So I think on this topic of emotional maturity, how do we change? We have to associate massive pain with not changing and massive pleasure to changing.
I'm going to think about how I can try that. I really like that.
Is there anything in the next month that you are focused on in terms of emotional maturity, or is there something that you're reading or watching that's intriguing you as a note to end on?
This is out of left field, but I'm watching a recording of the Grammys. But I was reminded at how absolutely inspired I get and other people get from fun.
Preach.
I was watching Chappell Roan perform Pink Pony Club on this enormous stage with an enormous pony and all these people dressed up as circus clowns. It was just it was the epitome of fun. And I was like, there is so much power in this fun right now. I need more of that.
I love that. Adding more fun, more play, talking about emotional maturity and resilience. I think part of resilience is also enjoying life.
Fun is what fills my cup. And I think that if your cup's not full, you're not going to be able to emotionally mature.
Shall we encourage our listeners to find something today? Find something fun to do in the next week. Fill your cup up with some joy.
Yes, then tell us about it.
Yeah, put it in the comments.
I need more ideas.
Heck yeah. Well, Katie, thank you for being co-host, and thank you for chatting today.
Thank you so much.
Go have fun now.
I will. You too.